sound? Thanks. So begins Beethoven's Fourth Piano Concerto. Before we perform, let me take a few minutes to thank our season sponsors, PNC Bank, Duke Energy, Life 103.1 FM, The Pilot, Milwaukee Foundation, and right here, Sandhills Community College. A virtual applause for our sponsors. Thank all of you for being here today. Thank all of our supporters at home. All right, before we jump into the concerto, I just want to take a couple minutes just to give a couple thoughts about the piece. First of all, here's my score. This I've been living with since I was about 12 years old. This used to be the 5 piano concertos of Beethoven, and I traveled all over the world with these. A piano teacher I had when I was 12, a master teacher, I went for a master class. He said, David, if you want to be a real pianist and you're playing piano concertos, you have to have the full orchestra score. So this was actually my very first orchestra score. And until 5 days ago, it actually had all 5 piano concertos of Beethoven. But in preparation for today, I tore it in half because it wasn't letting me turn any pages. It was like flopping open. So it's a sad moment for me. Look at this baby. Any of you have scores like this? Yeah. So Beethoven's Piano Concerto, just briefly, it's in 3 movements. The first movement begins with this piano solo, which was kind of extraordinary for the time. It was really a revolution to begin a piano concerto with the solos instead of the orchestra. And then the orchestra comes in. It's fairly traditional after that. When we get to the cadenza in the first movement, we could improvise, but nobody improvises the cadenza anymore because Beethoven wrote 2 of them that are the peak of genius. And so I'll be playing one of those. And the second movement is sort of the point of interest in the piece that everybody talks about. It's the sort of, people think of it as the story of Orpheus and of Orfeo, and that Orfeo was going into the underworld to rescue Euridice. And so the orchestra, at this point, is just the strings and the piano in the second movement, and they're in complete opposition to one another. So you've got this. Sorry for doing that, but. And then the piano comes in, and that is basically, you're at the gates of hell, and Orfeo is entreating the guards at the gate to let him pass so he can rescue his beloved from the underworld. And so then you have Orfeo singing to the orchestra, as it were, and the orchestra responds completely defiant, not listening to a word of what he's saying. And it goes back and forth like this, and gradually, eventually, Orfeo wears down the orchestra, and they come into his world. The third movement is a sort of frolicking, happy, joyful work. And the whole piece that I'll end with before we play it is, this is from Beethoven's middle period. It's Opus 58. Opus 57 was the Appassionata, which is this great, big, dramatic, passionate work. And when you think of Beethoven, you often think of the angry Beethoven, you know, the hair and the eyes, but you don't really necessarily always think of the Beethoven that loved taking walks in nature. And this piece, the whole of it, is like an exploration of nature. It starts almost like a walk through the woods, which Beethoven liked to do before he would compose. He would often walk through the woods, take inspiration, and then write down notes on the page. And it's not only the peaceful side of nature. You'll hear bird calls, you'll hear all these rustling sound of leaves falling and of trees and old trees and walking through this scenery. At least this is how I feel it. But you'll also you'll hear the brook, and you'll hear rivers become waterfalls. You'll hear not only the warm and wonderful side of nature, but you'll hear storms, you'll hear torrents, you'll feel the ocean. And this is really, it's a poem, in essence, to nature. And Beethoven, you find Beethoven with none of the anger, none of the angst, but absolutely at one with all of the powers of nature. So it's about 35 minutes long. It's absolutely beautiful. I remember when I first was I was playing a piano concerto with an orchestra. I was about maybe 19 or so, and the conductor, he gave me a choice of any of the Beethoven piano concertos. So I asked my teacher, I said, which one should I do? She said, well, you should 1, 3, or 5. And I said, what about 4? She said, absolutely not. So I chose 4. That was the first time I played it. And I remember taking my orchestra score, and I went to the piano rehearsal with the conductor before we had the orchestra, and to go through it with him. And so I started it, and there wasn't a second piano. So I said, look, I'll play the orchestra part too. So I was playing orchestra part, piano part, orchestra back and forth. He was conducting. And we got to the end of it, and he said, David, is there anything you want to do with me with this? I said, well, could we just look over your interpretation of the orchestra exposition? And he kind of looked at me, and anybody else would have just kicked me out the door, and he should have. But he was very friendly, so well, what do you have in mind? I remember going through it, and looking back, you know the times you can look back at your past and it kind of just embarrasses you? That's one of those moments. Beethoven's 4th Piano Concerto. Thank you so much. For the orchestra, I wish you were all here with us in the hall. We look forward to having you back soon. Please mark your calendars. I think a couple of weeks from tomorrow, we're going to have a special Easter Eve sort of music and scripture, walking through the last week of the life of Jesus. And I think it'll be really special. We'll have the barber adagio. We've got kind of a string orchestra plus and piano. And I hope you'll join us in a couple of weeks for that. Thank you so much. Be safe, be well. We miss you, and have a good night.